Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Lupus LA, for inviting me and the Attune Health team to present this webinar. It's a very exciting topic. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in the gut microbiome, intestinal permeability, and how all of this relates to lupus. And I know that you're all excited to get some information. Just by way of background and introduction, I'm a rheumatologist. I practice in Los Angeles. Cedars-Sinai is our home base, and Lupus LA is also our home base in a lot of ways. And we're really appreciative of all the amazing work that they're doing. And it's really exciting to be able to present some of this work to you. In our clinic, we've been working with patients and trying to figure out gut permeability, how to fix it, and the role of the intestinal microbiome in lupus pathogenesis for many years. We have a lot of experience working with patients directly, and I'm extremely thrilled to have two amazing nutritionists to work with, who all of you are going to meet today. Monique Vuong on the right side of the panel, from what I can see, and Natalie Fortune on the left side of our panel. And they will also be sharing their specialty and knowledge with you today. So the way we have this webinar planned out is that I will start out by laying the framework for the scientific evidence which supports that there are issues related to intestinal permeability, also known as leaky gut, and lupus. There are numerous studies that have reported on this particular issue, and our knowledge has actually increased quite a bit. And some of the researchers in this field are really able to make some of these very important connections that we had not known about prior to being able to study the gut microbiome. So let me take you through a little bit of the background information that you need and some of the scientific studies and information that you will need to be able to understand how then to fix the gut microbiome. After that, we will be open for some questions. So feel free to put in your questions and we'll do our best to answer them. And after my talk, actually, before the questions, Monique Vuong will present her presentation will be on how to fix the leaky gut problems that you might have. And Natalie Fortune, our other nutritionist, will talk to you about supplements that may be beneficial to you as lupus patients and have some scientific evidence for it. So I'm going to share my screen and share some slides. And hopefully you'll all be able to see this. And let me see if I can do a slideshow version. So yeah, I think this is it. So that's our identifying information and our website in case you guys want to get in touch with us. And so I'll start by talking to you about the hygiene hypothesis, which is really the basis for understanding how intestinal microbiome plays a role in health and disease. So the hygiene hypothesis is basically that over the last century or so, as we have been able to conquer most of the infectious diseases which used to cause most of the deaths in our patients, we have noticed a concomitant rise in autoimmune diseases. So this is a very intriguing relationship that we have observed in the literature. For example, most of the people up to the late 19th century, the leading cause of death for any patient was infection. Sepsis was very common, it was a known thing. But as we started understanding that, hey, there are microbes, Lister's hypothesis that, washing hands and things like that are important. And then fast forward to the 1960s, 70s, 80s, where we started disinfecting all these surfaces and we started using antibiotics quite rampantly in our society. And corresponding to that is also an increase in autoimmunity, and it's corresponded to the decline in the immune system. Infectious diseases. So that's a very intriguing possibility. Obviously, it's a hypothesis, and that means that it's not been scientifically validated yet, but it's definitely a very intriguing possibility, and it's certainly an observation that's worth going down on a little bit more and looking at it in detail and examining it. So what we've been doing is understanding that the hygiene hypothesis shows us an increase in the incidence of lupus and other autoimmune diseases. um, Multiple researchers have been trying to figure out what is the role of the gut microbiome and the other microbiome, which is basically all the bacteria, viruses, and fungi that live on our body. It turns out, and a lot of you may be familiar with this, that bacterial DNA is approximately 10 times that of human DNA within our own organism. And that's kind of a very fascinating fact that we're not aware of until recently. But importantly, what is the role of this bacterial DNA and what it's doing is really the object of our inquiry. And we're frankly scratching the surface of the ocean. For example, we're looking at the very top layer and a small part of this ocean, and there's a lot more learning to occur. But in today's presentation, I'm just going to give you the highlights of what we know so far. So since the 1990s, there have been numerous studies in lupus that have linked a imbalance in the normal bacterial architecture in the intestines and immune-mediated diseases. So most of these inquiries have actually been in patients who have gut issues, including Crohn's disease and things like that. But in lupus too, there are a fair number of studies, which I will briefly talk to you about. So we know that dysbiosis, and this is a term that I want you all to be familiar with. Dysbiosis is when there's not a healthy balance between different colonies and there's overpopulation of one or two colonies in relationship to other colonies. So we have co-evolved with our gut bacteria. You start getting colonized at the time of birth as the baby's exiting through the vaginal canal. That's when they imbibe the bacteria from the vaginal canal of the mom. So the mom's microbiome at the time of birth is critical to the baby's own microbiome development. And taking that to an extreme, there have been some studies suggesting that cesarean section babies potentially had higher incidence, for example, in Crohn's. I've come across some studies for that. That's not fully panned out, but it's certainly very intriguing preliminary data that we need to keep our eye on. So the gut microbiome has also been linked to B cells, and the B cells that live in the layer of the gut just below the surface are in contact with antigens and bacteria in the gut lumen. And when there's an imbalance of the gut bacteria in the lumen, it affects the types of B cells that are activated, and it pushes us towards something called autoreactive B cells, which are more inflammatory and related to autoimmune disease. And gut dysbiosis has also been shown in numerous studies to be associated with immune activation. So what's the role? Why am I harping on all these bacteria when this talk is about intestinal permeability or leaky gut? So there's a real correlation because the bacteria actually make the gut permeability worse. And when the gut permeability is worse, the bacterial antigens can then escape into the body layers and be exposed to the immune system, which then in turn propagates the autoimmune disease. So they're all linked. That's why we're talking so much about the intestinal microbiome in this presentation. So again, numerous studies. I'm going to go through some of these studies very quickly because this talk is being recorded and you should have access to any of these studies. Whoever wants to do a deeper dive into them is welcome to take a look. A meta-analysis which combines numerous studies to see if there is a real effect was published recently and showed that in lupus patients compared to healthy controls, there's definitely lack of bacterial diversity, and certain types of bacteria seem to be more prevalent in that group. And so bacterial diversity is something that I want you to take away from this talk and remember it, because that's one of the things we can do to help ourselves. And here's a very nice picture of the gut lining. So here, hopefully you can see my arrow, but here is a mucus layer, which is And the layer and above that layer is the gut lumen. So this is where all the food and digestive enzymes, etc., are. Then there is a layer of mucus. In the mucus layer are the bacteria, and that's where they live. And here in this mucus layer, we have defensins and immunoglobulin A, and that's the body's way to inactivate certain types of bacteria. Just beneath that mucosal layer is the epithelial layer. Epithelial layer consists of numerous cells. Each cell is interlinked very closely with its adjoining cell. And the junction between these two cells normally would allow food to pass through, or would allow for sampling of the bacteria which are sitting in this mucus layer to go down here and be sampled by the lymphocytes. So it's important for the immune system to consistently be sampling what's going on in the gut so that it's aware and that prepares its defense in case there's a huge attack on the body of some sort. So that's their job. These are the soldiers of your body, so to say. So this is the crucial part, the tight junction that occurs between these cells and prevents bacteria and other antigens from going through to the layers underneath. And that's when that is impaired, and when these junctions become loose, then you start having bacteria passing right through. You have other antigens in food, for example, like dairy antigens or gluten antigens, etc., going through here and stimulating your immune system. And it turns out that about 70% of the immune system actually resides within the small intestine. So that's a huge area by which the immune system actually interacts with the outside world, and which is why this is so important, such an important area of emerging research, but also importance in how lupus and other autoimmune diseases occur. So, what is the data that suggests that there is gut barrier impairment in lupus? So there's numerous studies which I've listed here. Some of them are mouse studies, and some of these studies have taken fecal samples from human lupus patients and put them into mice that are prone to lupus and were able to cause lupus. So there's definitely a connection here between the gut bacterial diversity, some of the bacteria that we see in the lumen, and the onset of lupus. So these are all the references for you to take a look at your leisure if you're so inclined. And there's some more studies that I just put in here for your reference. So now gut permeability, how do you assess it in clinical practice? It's not extremely easy. There are some tests though, and you can do tests that look for antibodies against those tight junctions, the proteins in those tight junctions. That's one indirect way to do it. Or you can give a patient a load of certain food and see how quickly that gets into the human body, indicating permeability. So there's different ways to test it. And these are the methods that are used to study this particular topic. Okay. Now I'm going to switch gears and give you some very top level results that we now know in lupus, and talking about particular bacteria that have been involved. So there's this group of bacteria called Ruminococcus navis. Navis is one bacteria that was seen in about 60 female lupus patients. And there was a 5-fold increase in this particular bacteria in the fecal samples of these patients, especially when they were having lupus nephritis flares. And that was really fascinating. And this has led to a lot of excitement in this field, because it's the first time that we were able to show that a bacterial bloom was associated with lupus nephritis flare-up. And what an amazing concept, because we've never thought about it before until this point, and we've never really understood that there would be one bacteria. And if you think about it, what is that bacteria doing, and why would a flare or a bloom in these bacteria in the colon suddenly cause kidney problems? And the answer is, if you have gut permeability, and if you have a bloom of these bacteria, all the bacteria have proteins on their surfaces. It turns out that with this particular bacteria, there's a cross reactivity between double-stranded DNA, which most of you people who have lupus have heard about double-stranded DNA antibodies. So if there is a protein on this bacteria, which is blooming, you have intestinal permeability, it makes its way into the bloodstream, and there's a cross-reactivity with um, double-stranded DNA, you can imagine what happens. You get more anti-double-stranded DNA antibodies, and when you have more anti-double-stranded DNA antibodies, that can lead to lupus nephritis flare. So that's the proposed mechanism. Obviously, there's more work that needs to be done, but our NAVIS is something that we in the lupus research community are keeping a very close eye on. And as its role becomes more understood, hopefully we'll have some ways to control it as well. So I'm going to conclude there because this is really an overview talk, and I'll let you know that based on the studies that we have so far, which are numerous, but still we're scratching the surface of something that's extremely vast, and who knows what we'll find as we keep looking. We know that a few bacteria, particularly Enterococcus gallinareum and R. navis in clinical lupus cohorts, have demonstrated the fact that gut barrier impairment allows for the host to be exposed to these gut antigens, and that can flare lupus. So we know that. But we still are not sure about what other gut bacterial species are important. How can we control these microbes, and how can we use them to our advantage to help with lupus patients? So that's all to be determined, and stuff that we will need to work on as we go ahead with this research. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and hopefully that overview was not too dense and people were able to understand it. And so I'll go into the next part of our talk, which would be our nutritionist, Monique Vuong, now teaching you what she knows about how do you fix this gut permeability so that we may have an advantage in controlling lupus. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'll let Monique take it from here.
Thank you, Dr. V. Okay, so to start, today we'll be talking about what constitutes your gut. So a lot of times people hear gut health, but they're not sure what does that really mean. So I'll be going over the organs involved and the role of each in digestion. Then I'll talk about your gut microbiome in more detail. So what it is, where it's located, more in depth about your gut microbiome and what causes it to be out of balance and what leaky gut looks like. And then I'll go into the ways that lupus can affect digestion and impact your gut health, as well as what we can do to restore that and heal a leaky gut. And then finally, Natalie will go into the latest research on other diet and nutrition recommendations. When we talk about your gut, we are referring to your entire digestive tract. So that starts from your mouth, and this is where the saliva production in your mouth initiates the beginning of digestion of starches. It also is important in maintaining the balance of your oral microbiome, which is also linked to your gut microbiome. So you really want adequate saliva production. Then your esophagus, which helps to propel food down into your stomach. And in your stomach, this is where you have stomach acid production that helps to initiate protein digestion. And this mixture then enters your small intestine. And it needs a certain level of stomach acid to be present to trigger the release of enzymes from your pancreas and bile from your gallbladder to continue with digestion and absorption. So this is where the majority of your absorption of nutrients happens. And this is where, if you have intestinal permeability, this is where leaky gut occurs. Finally, the food then enters your colon or your large intestine, where your gut microbiome resides. And this is also where your body reabsorbs water, salts, produces waste. So as you can see, every part of your digestive tract is involved in digestion, and you really want to ensure that there's balance in all those organs and systems so that you can really utilize your nutrients. What is your gut microbiome? So Dr. V touched on that a little bit and mentioning that it requires a balance of commensal or good bacteria and opportunistic or bad bacteria. And like he mentioned, around 70% of your immune system is in your gut, and 90% of serotonin, which is that feel-good hormone, is made in your gut. And serotonin is also the precursor to melatonin, which is important for sleep regulation. So what these bacteria do is they produce products called short-chain fatty acids, which then regulate your immune system, metabolism, blood sugar, memory, and mood. When you have an imbalance, that's when problems arise. And some factors that can contribute to this picture are things such as stress, whether that be physical or psychological, toxins, whether that be environmental, chemical, even the toxins that are produced from your bad gut bacteria, certain inflammatory foods that are high in saturated fat and refined carbohydrates, other lingering gut infections, as well as nutritional imbalances. So when you have these different inflammatory triggers, it can exceed a certain threshold, and I won't go into detail since Dr. V had already explained the difference between a normal and a leaky gut. But what I will mention is if you're noticing that initially you didn't have these food sensitivities and over time you're starting to react to more foods, it could be because you have intestinal permeability. So what's happening is these foods that are typically staying out of your bloodstream are entering your bloodstream and triggering a response. So when you heal that lining, oftentimes you'll see that those food sensitivities will go away. So these aren't things that you need to necessarily eliminate permanently. Now, when we look at how does lupus affect every aspect of digestion, starting with the mouth. So some patients will have decreased saliva production, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the beginning of starch digestion and helps keep your oral microbiome balanced. So that's something to think about. It can also decrease your muscle tone in your esophagus. So things predisposing you to things like acid reflux or food coming back up and not really moving downward in the other direction where it should be going. And then also the long-term use of steroids and NSAIDs can predispose a patient to stomach ulcers, and long-term use of PPIs decrease stomach acid production, which affects protein digestion, and then also the release of the enzymes and bile that would enter your small intestine, so affecting overall digestion and absorption. And finally, leading to gut dysbiosis. So long-term use of corticosteroids decreases your microbial diversity or can decrease it, and that in turn will allow for more imbalance and affecting the regulation of your immune system, metabolism, and all those other things that you see there. So what can we do to address this situation and restore your gut microbiome? For starters, you want to optimize your digestion. It's really important to set the right environment for your meals, and this is because your brain and your gut are connected via a vagus nerve, so there's bidirectional communication. You want your brain to signal to the rest of your body that it's ready to rest and digest, so activating your parasympathetic nervous system, which allows for the secretion of the appropriate enzymes and encourages motility. So things like taking time to prepare your food, sitting at a table, minimizing distractions and reducing stress, having good meal pacing and chewing your food thoroughly so that you have adequate saliva production for a balanced oral microbiome. And then also things like not skipping meals. So from day to day, it's important to have structure around your meal times for good blood sugar regulation. And you also want to refrain from grazing. Your digestive tract needs breaks so that your body can move the food downward, and it prevents things from fermenting or bacteria growing where they shouldn't. And then these are some of the digestive aids. So when we're addressing imbalances that are created from certain medications, things like gum chewing, xylitol gum can help to stimulate saliva production. And then these other foods can stimulate digestive enzymes and other things. When it comes to restoring the gut microbiome, there's a few key things. You want to make sure you're getting adequate fiber and variety of grains, nuts, seeds, fruits, and vegetables. So all these foods have a combination of soluble and insoluble fiber. And the recommendation is to get between 25 to 38 grams a day. And then more specifically, prebiotics, which are the food source for your gut bacteria. And that is soluble fiber and resistant starches, which I'll talk more about in the next slide. And then finally, you want to have probiotics. So probiotics are your good gut bacteria that can be found in fermented foods. So as you see, this isn't an extensive list, but it's some of the major foods that are prebiotics. So soluble fiber is a type of fiber that absorbs water and forms a gel consistency. So if you notice, these foods on the left have a gel-like consistency, and they are food for your gut bacteria. This, at the same time, so our bodies have enzymes to digest potatoes, rice, and oats, but when they're cooled, they change their chemical structure and become resistant to digestion, so they behave more like a soluble fiber. And these are some probiotic foods that you can incorporate throughout your day, around a serving a day to start. And these are some supplements so that you can take to help with intestinal permeability issues. I wouldn't recommend that anyone just decide, okay, I'm going to take these different supplements. It's really important to work with a dietitian who can help personalize and provide recommendations based on what's going on for you. And then Natalie will continue with additional nutrition and supplements.
Great. Thank you so much, Monique. That was very comprehensive. So everybody, it's important for everyone to follow a well-balanced diet. Now, there are a lot of different individual cases where people with lupus find specific things are helpful for them. But the main overall research shows that a focus on fiber, polyunsaturated fatty acids, and all vitamins and minerals, but specifically vitamins A, the B vitamins, C, D, E, and minerals, calcium, zinc, selenium, iron, and copper are especially important, and you should pay attention to those. And then also polyphenol containing foods, which are very strong antioxidants that are in different plant foods. So to highlight some of the vitamins, they're all important for maintaining a healthy immune system, but some studies have actually shown that having an intake of 110 milligrams a day of vitamin C was actually associated with a lower risk of developing SLE. Now, this is probably because vitamin C is an antioxidant that regulates the release of inflammatory mediators. Now, you may be thinking, oh my gosh, I need to go out and grab a vitamin C supplement. And you could do that and it could help, but it's important to remember that for some nutrients, it's very important that you actually get it through the food that you're eating. So to highlight that that is possible, 1 cup of strawberries has about 90 milligrams of vitamin C, and 1 medium red bell pepper has about 95. And it's pretty reasonable to think that you would have both of those foods in one day, which would be well over 110 milligrams. Now, of course, these aren't the only 2 foods that have vitamin C. Most fruits and vegetables contain quite a bit, but just showing that it is possible to get that amount and have that protective effect that the vitamin C can provide. Another important vitamin to mention is vitamin D. And that's because vitamin D deficiency is associated with increasing burden of autoimmune diseases over the last few years. And vitamin D is one of the nutrients that it's actually very difficult to get through your diet, which is why we wanted to mention it. But because it's difficult to get it through your diets, our bodies have created this way to make it ourselves, which involves going in the sunlight and having the sunshine interact with your skin. But unfortunately, for people with lupus, you may be photosensitive, so that's not an option. So that's why vitamin D is a specific concern. And then also our bodies need very good kidney function to synthesize that vitamin D. And people with lupus may be experiencing some renal insufficiency, which could make that synthesis more difficult. And then last, also, there's many medications that can actually increase your body's need for vitamin D. For example, prednisone is one of those. So for those reasons, it's important to ask your healthcare provider if you think that vitamin D might be something you want to supplement with. And there's a few different tests they may want to run to figure out how much and what form you should be taking. Another important nutrient is polyphenols, which I mentioned are very strong antioxidants. And I wanted to highlight specifically lycopene, which is a flavonoid. And lycopene, think all red foods. So it's very high in tomatoes, red carrots, watermelons. And lycopene has been found to have a very protective effect on mortality for people with SLE. So what that means is that people who had a higher level of flavonoids in their blood had a lower risk of mortality, which is a good thing. A mineral I want to highlight is calcium. And this is because people with lupus are at higher risk for developing osteoporosis, which affects your bones and which makes you need more calcium to keep them strong. Everybody knows that dairy, like cheese and milk, have a lot of calcium in them. But what a lot of people might not be aware of is that leafy greens actually contain a lot of calcium, like kale, spinach, collard greens, cabbage. And these are really important foods to incorporate into your diet, not only because of the calcium, but they also have so many other benefits which can help your gut stay healthy too. And then almonds are also high in calcium, as well as canned sardines and salmon when they're fed with the bones. Polyunsaturated fatty acids are also an important nutrient to make sure you're having enough of for someone with lupus. And specifically, an example would be omega-3s. And this is because if you have lupus, you're at an increased risk for developing heart disease. And omega-3s help protect your heart and your whole cardiovascular system. Foods that are high in omega-3s are fatty fish, like salmon and sardines, and nuts and seeds like walnuts and flax seeds. And not only are omega-3s important for your heart, they're also very important for your gut health and also for your brain and just your overall. That's pretty much what we have for you guys. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have, and we appreciate you all being here.
Thank you.
Maggie, do you want to ask us the questions, or do you want me to look through?
Sure. You know, it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you to all of you, and such valuable information. And you did definitely covered a lot of some of the questions that were coming in about, prebiotics, probiotics, fiber. There was a question about clinical trials for leaky gut, and if a patient was interested in that, how might they go about seeking that out?
I'll take that, I guess. It's hard to do clinical trials because it's pretty expensive to run clinical trials. And as you know, most of the clinical trials are funded by pharmaceutical companies. And unless and until there's something that they can test out, it becomes hard to run clinical trials. I mean, we are actually doing a clinical trial in rheumatoid arthritis in our practice. And we did not start with lupus. We started with rheumatoid arthritis, which is a little bit easier to get our hands around as a disease condition because lupus is so diverse and there's so many different manifestations of it. But usually these are going to be few and far between these sorts of studies because they are, generally not funded. We were very, fortunate to be funded by one of our patients actually, and have been working on this clinical trial now. But I would say it's hard. One way to look for clinical trials is to go to a website called clinicaltrials.gov in the US. And that tells you all of the trials that are ongoing. And you can search by condition or you can search by drug or anything like that. So if you're interested, I think that would be the place to start.
Thank you. We do have a question here that says, do you agree with Dr. Brooke Goldner and her protocol for lupus reversal and a plant-based diet? I don't know if anyone's familiar with that.
I'm actually not familiar with that, but we can look it up and get back to you.
Yeah, anything that we might not be able to provide information for, we'll try to get that answered. We're also talking about, can you talk about whether or not red meats and carbs increase inflammation and is truly a trigger for lupus flares or not?
So we do recommend an anti-inflammatory way of eating. So doing more plant-based protein over red meat that's higher in saturated fat. If someone is to do red meat, we recommend doing grass-fed because the omega-3 content is higher. And then as far as carbs, I would say it really depends. So not the refined carbohydrates, but complex carbohydrates such as beans, certain gluten-free grains are recommended for certain patients, but it really depends on the person and their individual situation.
Okay, thank you. There was something here that says, do you typically recommend that lupus patients on steroids automatically supplement with vitamin D?
I mean, Dr. Lee, I don't know if you want to touch on that, but it
Yeah,
might be
I
helpful.
would. Yeah, I tend to do that. I mean, in my practice in Los Angeles, even though it's pretty sunny out here, the number of people who are vitamin D deficient is astounding. It's 50 to 60% of my patients are vitamin D deficient. So even if and we know that steroids impair the absorption of vitamin D. So I tend to, supplement. I think there's good data that vitamin D can help immune system function, as Monique had talked about. And yeah, I'm not hesitant to supplement with vitamin D. I recommend it for a lot of my patients, most of my patients, in fact.
Monique and Natalie, I'm not sure if you kind of touch on this, but there's a lot of there was a lot of questions around, is there such thing as a lupus diet that's actually called that versus just some of the other recommendations of what you were speaking of?
Yeah. There's not really these are exactly what you need to eat every day to help your lupus. It's very individualized, we find. Different people have sometimes different food triggers where if they eat them, it can increase their symptoms. And likewise, making sure you have the right nutrients can also impact your symptoms too. So that's why, unfortunately, we're kind of like, these are the overall things, but a lot of the times you have to put in a lot of work to figure out if there are specific foods that are contributing to your symptoms.
Yeah, there was an interesting question around, how does one distinguish between leaky gut and IBS? And are there similarities in that, and can that be confusing?
There are, so leaky gut can contribute to a lot of these symptoms. So the place that I usually like to start with patients is assessing, are there things that we can do? Are there issues with the intestinal lining? Resolving that first and then seeing what's left over and addressing, continuing to dig deeper and see what imbalances there are, what can be contributing to those symptoms. So more from a root cause approach.
Okay. And are there any day-to-day symptoms, like if someone really was trying to assess for themselves about leaky gut and if that's something they should be concerned about, are there other specific symptoms that they might see day to day or more frequently that would be like a red flag or an indicator?
Aside from the developing new food sensitivities, I would say it's hard to know because a lot of GI symptoms are overlapping with other conditions. So it would be hard to say if I'm experiencing these symptoms, this means this is what's happening.
There was also a question about the correlation between dairy, like in leaky gut. Is there a correlation between that, and should folks be avoiding that, or do you recommend dairy in the diet?
I mean, Monique kind of touched on that. Sometimes with leaky gut, you'll have more food sensitivities. We find that there are certain foods that are more commonly causing, whether it's leaky gut or other symptoms too. If you're concerned or you questioning if dairy is an issue for you, you can always eliminate it for a few weeks, but you would really have to eliminate it 100% and see if you feel better. Do your symptoms, get a little bit better? Do you have more energy? Things like that. And then you would want to actually reintroduce it and test it. And that's when it can be helpful to work with a dietitian or another healthcare professional to help you really pinpoint those things. But of course, you want to make sure if you are eliminating dairy, you need to make sure you're getting calcium in other ways.
And also to add to that, sometimes I think there's benefit for patients incorporating yogurt in their diet because of the probiotics. So in that case, I wouldn't say across the board eliminating entirely. There's certain sources that can have benefits to them. And then also the quality too.
There's a question here about milligrams or amounts of probiotics on a daily basis. I don't know if that's something that folks should just maybe be talking to their provider about specifically, or is there like a general range of milligrams or amounts for daily supplements and probiotics?
I would say not necessarily milligrams of the probiotics. So I would recommend starting with a serving of probiotic foods a day. So what that looks like is it's around a half a cup of cooked or fermented foods, 1 to 2 times a day.
Okay. And there was a question also just about if people wanted to, where would they wanted to look more to getting the help of a registered dietitian, where might they start?
Well, we're seeing patients in our clinic, and then another place to start would be searching on if you go to your insurance, you can search dietitians that way. But if you're looking for specifically autoimmune, I would recommend looking at clinics, either our clinic or another similar who has a dietitian or nutritionist on staff.
Yeah, I've heard that patients can go through their primary care or rheumatologist to try and get a referral. Just taking a look, I think talked about the red meats. Thank everyone for their patience. Have you seen lupus patients go into remission going on a plant-based diet?
No, I don't know if I've personally seen that, but there are, a few research articles and case studies where that happened. Dr. B, I don't know if you have any more about
case studies. Yeah, there's definitely case studies. I have had a couple of patients go into remission, but it's not really just plant-based diets. Changes in diet are pretty powerful tools to control inflammation. And I find that some people who are, vegan, for example, they may have inflammation even though they're on a plant-based diet. So it's not necessarily only plant-based diet, but I've definitely seen a couple of patients over the years go into remission when they've been able to change their diet significantly.
So question here, do nightshades cause inflammation?
Yeah, that's a good question. For some people, absolutely. A lot, sometimes so nightshades, for anyone who doesn't know, are tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, goji berries, actually, tomatillos, things like that. And for some people, and not just lupus, right? Like other autoimmune diseases too, but for some people, they eat a tomato and then the next morning their joints will hurt or they'll get a rash, something like that. And for those people, yeah, they probably shouldn't have it, but it's not the case for everyone. And for some people, those foods actually have a really important nutrients. So you don't want to unnecessarily eliminate them, but that is another food that, similar to the dairy that I mentioned, you can eliminate it and then test it. Sometimes a lot of the potency in nightshade vegetables lies within the seeds and the skin. So you can always try removing those to see if it makes a difference. But for some people it does.
I also wanted to add that when we're working with patients, we're really trying to ensure that they have as much variety as possible while also not eating certain foods. So that's why there's a high level of personalization with these protocols to each individual.
Thank you. There was also something about like they've heard that garlic is bad for lupus, and they're not sure if that's accurate.
There's a little bit of research that garlic and alfalfa sprouts might make lupus worse. So, you know, if you find that, then that's something you can avoid too.
There's one question here that says, oh, I'm sorry, Dr. B, were you going to say something?
No.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Have you seen children born to mothers with lupus having severe food allergies? Is there any correlation there?
I'll let you answer that, Dr.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any studies that link severe food allergies to lupus mothers, but definitely severe food allergies in mothers who have allergies themselves, potentially having a lot of medications, microbiome alterations. I think allergies, I view them similar to autoimmune diseases. It's the immune system interacting with the environment through the gut microbiome. So if you have an altered gut microbiome and you pass it on to your kids, and your kids are, let's say, exposed to a lot of antibiotics and have a very monochromatic diet with not a lot of fiber and fruits and vegetables, then you can harbor an unhealthy microbiome which can predispose you to more allergies. So I do see it with a similar lens.
Okay, well, thank you. I think one final question before we will say thank you and wrap up is that there are many questions about where your clinic is located. If you want to share that.
Yeah, we're in California, Beverly Hills, California. We're available online, mainly to patients in California for medical consultations. But definitely, through our online presence, we try to put out a lot of information to help our patients and community.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing all that wonderful, valuable information with us. And thank you to everyone who is joining us, and we wish you a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.